I'm Amelia Rhodes, and I want you to know something important when they escorted me out of my own company, like I was some kind of security threat. They had no idea that just 3 feet away, tucked inside my purse, was the document that would cost them their entire IPO. I sold my company for $1, and now I'm buying it back for that exact same dollar. But this time, I'm bringing the investor list and a revenge plan mapped out like a chess game. Have you ever watched a startup melt from the inside out? Sit down, because I'm about to show you how it starts with a microwave and a syntax error. Let me take you back to where this all began. 3 years ago, I was living in a studio apartment in Pittsburgh's Lawrenceville neighborhood, the kind of place where the radiator clanged like angry ghosts and the microwave was older than my college diploma. I was 29, fresh off a layoff from a data analytics firm that had decided my position was redundant. Redundant. That's corporate speak for, we're replacing you with an algorithm that costs less than your coffee budget. But here's the thing about being broke and desperate. It clarifies your thinking in ways that comfort never could. I had exactly $47 in my checking account and a laptop that wheezed like an asthmatic chain smoker. But I also had something else, a data model that could predict customer behavior with 93% accuracy. I'd been working on it during lunch breaks and stolen moments, feeding it purchasing patterns, demographic data, and behavioral triggers until it started spitting out predictions that were almost supernatural in their precision. The eureka moment came on a Tuesday night while I was heating up my third consecutive dinner of instant ramen. I was staring at the microwave's digital display, watching the numbers count down. When it hit me, consumer decisions weren't random chaos. They were patterns, as predictable as that timer if you knew how to read the variables. I grabbed a napkin and started sketching out algorithms between the grease stains. By Thursday, I had called 3 people: Asha Patel, my former colleague who could code faster than most people could think; Julian Torres, a UI designer who'd been freelancing since our company imploded; and Beth Morrison, a business development specialist who knew how to talk to investors without sounding like she was reading from a technical manual. We met at a coffee shop in Shadyside, the kind of place that charged $5 for coffee, but let you sit there for hours without buying anything else. "So you want to build a company around a napkin covered in equations?" Julian asked, squinting at my sketches. "I want to build a company around the future of consumer analytics," I corrected. "The napkin is just the delivery method." Beth leaned back in her chair. "And you think this algorithm of yours can really predict what people will buy before they know they want to buy it?" "I think this algorithm can tell you that Sarah in Denver is going to switch from her current smartphone to a different brand 18 days before she even starts comparison shopping. I think it can predict that Marcus in Atlanta will buy a gym membership on January 3rd, cancel it by February 15th, and sign up for a meal delivery service by March 1st. I think it can see patterns in human behavior that we don't even know we're creating." Asha was already pulling out her laptop. "Show me the code." That night, the 4 of us crowded into my apartment and turned my kitchen table into mission control. We ordered pizza with my last $27 and worked until sunrise, debugging code, sketching user interfaces, and arguing about everything from variable names to company structure. By the time the sun came up, we had a working prototype and a name: Insight Dynamics. The next 6 months were a blur of 18-hour days, caffeine-fueled coding sessions, and more ramen than any human should consume in a lifetime. We built our platform piece by piece, testing it against real datasets, refining the algorithms until they hummed like perfectly tuned engines. Asha handled the back-end architecture. Julian crafted interfaces that made complex data feel intuitive. And Beth networked like her life depended on it, which, frankly, it did. Our first client was a local bakery chain that wanted to optimize their inventory. Our model predicted that their strawberry croissants would sell 60% better if they moved them to eye level and increased production on rainy days. It sounded insane, but the data was clear. 2 weeks later, the bakery owner called us, practically shouting into the phone, "I don't know how you did it, but our strawberry croissant sales are up 78%. Word spread. Small businesses started reaching out, then medium-sized companies, then corporations with analytics budgets bigger than my annual rent. Within 8 months, we were processing data for clients across 3 states and generating enough revenue to move operations out of my apartment and into a proper office space, nothing fancy, just a converted warehouse in the Strip District with good internet and windows that actually opened. That's when Veritas North came calling. Gavin Pratt arrived on a Wednesday morning in October, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly income and carrying a briefcase that looked like it could survive a nuclear blast. He was accompanied by Lena Vaughn, whose business card listed her title as Vice President of Brand Strategy and Visionary Initiatives. Even her job title was unnecessarily complicated. Amelia, Gavin said, settling into our conference room chair like he was claiming territory. What you've built here is remarkable, truly remarkable, but you're thinking too small. I bristled. Excuse me. You're treating this like a regional analytics firm, Lena chimed in, her voice pitched in that particular frequency that consultants use when they want to sound both wise and slightly disappointed. But what you have is a revolutionary approach to consumer psychology. You're not just predicting purchases, you're mapping the human decision-making process. Gavin opened his briefcase and pulled out a presentation folder, thick enough to stop a bullet. Veritas North specializes in scaling innovative technologies. We've taken 17 startups from concept to IPO in the last 5 years. We see massive potential in insight dynamics. But you need infrastructure, capital, and strategic guidance to reach that potential. The offer was simple in the way that good magic tricks are simple. Veritas North would acquire Insight Dynamics for $1, but I would retain a significant ownership stake and remain as Chief Technology Officer with full control over product development. They would provide funding, office space, marketing support, and access to their network of enterprise clients. It seemed too good to be true, which should have been my first warning. But here's what they showed us: client contracts worth millions. Office spaces in downtown Pittsburgh that made our warehouse look like a storage closet, and a 5-year plan that had Insight Dynamics becoming the dominant player in predictive consumer analytics. They painted a picture of conferences and TED Talks, of Fortune 500 companies competing for our services, of an IPO that would make us all rich enough to buy our own coffee shops instead of squatting in other people's. The contract was 47 pages long. I read every word, twice. Section 14C caught my attention. In the event that the acquired party's primary technical contributor is terminated without cause, said contributor retains the right to repurchase all intellectual property and assets for the original acquisition price within 30 days of termination. I called my lawyer, Marcus Elliott, who'd helped me set up the LLC when we started. He was a solo practitioner who worked out of a building that had seen better decades. But he knew contract law like a medieval scholar knew Latin. This clause is unusual, he said, adjusting his glasses as he read. Very unusual. Most acquisition contracts include non-compete agreements and intellectual property transfers that would prevent exactly this kind of scenario. Should I be worried? Probably not. It's likely a standard protection clause that they never expect to trigger. But it's written clearly and appears to be legally binding. If they fire you without cause, you could theoretically buy back everything for $1. I signed the contract. The first few months were exactly what Gavin and Lena had promised. We moved into a gleaming office tower downtown, complete with standing desks, ergonomic chairs, and a coffee machine that probably had more computing power than my old laptop. Our team expanded from 4 to 15, then to 30. We landed contracts with major retailers, insurance companies, and tech firms who wanted to understand their customers' minds before their customers did. But somewhere around month 6, things started to shift. It began with the meetings. What used to be focused technical discussions became sprawling brand strategy sessions. Lena would arrive with PowerPoint presentations about optimizing our narrative and leveraging synergistic opportunities. She talked about the importance of thought leadership and market positioning, with the kind of evangelical fervor usually reserved for religious conversions. We need to think beyond just data, she announced during one particularly surreal team meeting. We're not selling analytics, we're selling transformation. We're selling the future. Asha caught my eye from across the table and made a face that clearly said, "What the hell is she talking about?" The technical team started getting sidelined. Instead of engineers, Veritas North hired brand consultants, marketing specialists, and something called culture architects. Our clean, functional office space was gradually filled with motivational posters featuring eagles and mountain peaks, accompanied by phrases like, "Embrace the possibility," and "Disrupt your limitations." The worst part was the rebranding. One morning, I arrived at the office to find our entire visual identity had been replaced overnight. Our simple, clean logo was gone, replaced by something that looked like a neon sunset having an existential crisis. The company literature featured a new mascot, a glowing blob called Glowy, that was supposed to represent the spark of insight in every data point. I found Lena in her office, surrounded by poster boards covered in color swatches and font samples. "What happened to our branding?" I asked. She looked up with the kind of smile that's reserved for explaining simple concepts to small children. "We evolved it. The old branding was very technical, very male-coded. We needed something that spoke to emotional intelligence, to the humanity behind the data. Our clients are CFOs and operations managers. They care about accuracy and results, not emotional intelligence. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need to move beyond," she said, gesturing toward a poster that showed Glowy dancing through a field of numbers. "We're not just providing data, we're providing enlightenment." The breaking point came during a product development meeting in November. I was presenting updates to our core algorithm when Gavin interrupted. "Amelia, this is all very impressive technically, but we need to think about storytelling. How do we make this data feel more aspirational?" "Aspirational," I repeated. "It's predictive analytics, not a lifestyle brand." "Everything is a lifestyle brand if you think about it correctly," Lena added. "We need our clients to feel like they're not just buying software, they're joining a movement." I looked around the room at my team. Asha was staring at her laptop screen like she was contemplating throwing it out the window. Julian was doodling what appeared to be a very unflattering portrait of Glowy. Beth was taking notes, but her expression suggested she was writing down reasons to update her resume. "I think we need to focus on what actually works," I said carefully. "Our algorithm's accuracy rate has improved to 96%. Our client retention is at 94%. Revenue is up 300% year over year. Maybe we should concentrate on expanding those successes instead of completely reinventing our approach." Gavin and Lena exchanged one of those loaded glances that couples use when they're deciding who has to tell the babysitter that little Timmy has been setting things on fire again. "Amelia," Gavin said in his most diplomatic voice, "we appreciate your technical contributions, but strategy requires a broader perspective. We need to trust the process." That's when I knew I was in trouble. When executives start talking about trusting the process, it usually means they've already decided to do something stupid, and they want you to stop asking inconvenient questions. Over the next few weeks, I watched my role steadily diminish. Technical decisions that used to require my approval were made in meetings I wasn't invited to. The engineering team started reporting to a new VP of product innovation whose background was in social media marketing. Our algorithms were being modified by consultants who specialized in user experience optimization, but couldn't explain the difference between correlation and causation. I started staying late, partly to keep an eye on what was happening to our code, and partly because going home meant acknowledging that the company I'd built was being systematically dismantled by people who thought disruption meant adding more animations to the user interface. It was during one of these late nights that I overheard the conversation that changed everything. I was in the server room, running diagnostics on our latest deployment, when I heard voices in the conference room next door. The walls were thin enough that I could make out every word. "IPO timeline is still on track for Q2, Gavin was saying. "But we need to clean up the cap table before we file." "What about the technical team?" That was Lena's voice. "We'll keep the essential personnel. The algorithm is already documented. And frankly, most of the real innovation work is done. What we need now is scale and market presence." And Amelia. There was a long pause. My heart started beating so hard I was worried they might hear it through the wall. Amelia is brilliant, Gavin said finally. But she's not a growth stage executive. She thinks like an engineer, not like a leader. The board is going to want to see experienced management, people who understand how to build sustainable value. So we transition her out before the IPO. We transition her out before the roadshow. Clean narrative, experienced team, proven scalability. Investors love that story. I stood in that server room for another 20 minutes, listening to them discuss my departure like they were planning a lunch order. They talked about severance packages and non-disclosure agreements, about how to position the transition to minimize disruption. They even discussed the best time of day to deliver the news, apparently. Thursday afternoon at 4:30 was optimal for reducing the chance of emotional scenes. That night, I went home and pulled out my copy of the acquisition contract. I read Section 14C again, then called Marcus. Hypothetically, I said, if someone were terminated without cause, how quickly could they exercise that repurchase option? Hypothetically, immediately. The contract specifies 30 days to exercise the option, but there's no minimum waiting period. Why do you ask? Just hypothetically curious. I spent the weekend preparing. I pulled together every document related to the original founding of Insight Dynamics. I printed copies of client contracts, algorithm specifications, and performance metrics. I wrote out a check for $1 and put it in a clean white envelope, and I called Asha, Julian, and Beth. We need to talk, I said. All of us. Somewhere private. We met at the same coffee shop where we'd planned the company 3 years earlier. I told them what I'd overheard, what I suspected was coming, and what I planned to do about it. You're going to buy back the entire company for $1, Beth asked. If they fire me, yes. The contract is clear. Julian leaned forward. And then what? Then we rebuild. Properly this time, no glowy, no thought leadership, no culture architects, just good technology and better clients. Asha was already grinning. I assume you'll need a technical team. I assume I will. The notification came on Thursday morning at 9:15 a.m. Gavin wanted to see me in the conference room at 4:30 p.m. Just a quick strategy discussion, his assistant said. I spent the day working normally, finishing code reviews, answering emails, and backing up files to my personal drive, just routine maintenance, nothing suspicious. At 4:29 p.m., I walked into the conference room carrying only my purse and a legal pad. Gavin and Lena were already there, along with someone from HR whose name I'd never bothered to learn. Amelia, please sit down, Gavin said. His voice had that careful neutrality that people use when they're about to deliver bad news and want to seem compassionate about it. We've been doing some strategic planning for the next phase of growth, Lena began. And we've realized that we need to make some organizational changes to position ourselves for the IPO. I nodded politely. What kind of changes? We're transitioning to a more experienced leadership structure, Gavin said. We'll be bringing in a chief technology officer with enterprise-scale experience, someone who's taken companies public before. And my role? Well, that's what we wanted to discuss. We think this might be a good time for you to explore new opportunities. We're prepared to offer a very generous severance package, and of course, we'll provide excellent references. The HR person slid a folder across the table. This outlines the terms of your departure. You'll have full benefits continuation for 6 months, and we're offering 12 weeks of severance pay. I looked at the folder without opening it. Is this termination for cause? Oh no, Lena said quickly. This is purely a strategic restructuring. Your performance has been excellent. So I'm being terminated without cause. You're being transitioned to new opportunities, Gavin corrected. This is about fit and growth strategy, not performance. I stood up. I'll need some time to review this. Of course, take all the time you need. We'd like to announce the transition internally by next week, but there's no rush on your decision. I walked back to my desk, packed my laptop and personal items into a box, and left the building. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I'd already had those conversations over the weekend, Friday morning at 9:00 a.m. Marcus hand-delivered an envelope to Veritas North's legal department. Inside was a single-page letter exercising my right to repurchase all assets and intellectual property of Insight Dynamics, along with a check for $1. By 10:30 a.m., my phone was ringing. Amelia. This is David Chen from Veritas North Legal. I think there might be some confusion about your letter. No confusion. I'm exercising the repurchase option outlined in Section 14C of the acquisition agreement. But that clause was just a standard protection provision. It wasn't meant to be actually used. Then you probably shouldn't have included it in a legally binding contract. There was a long pause. Can you hold, please? I held for 15 minutes, listening to classical music that had probably been chosen by the same consultants who designed Glowy. When David came back on the line, his voice was noticeably tighter. We're going to need to review this with our corporate counsel. This is a very unusual situation. Take all the time you need. The contract allows 30 days for completion of the transaction. I hung up and called Asha. It's happening. The next few hours were chaos orchestrated from a distance, through contacts still inside Veritas North. I heard about emergency meetings, panicked phone calls to board members, and lawyers working frantically to find some way around a contract they'd never bothered to read carefully. The problem from their perspective was that the acquisition had never been fully completed. Due to various regulatory requirements and due diligence processes, the final paperwork was still pending. On paper, I still owned the controlling interest in Insight Dynamics. The purchase agreement gave me the right to reclaim assets that technically had never been fully transferred. By Tuesday, I had my company back. But more importantly, I had my client list, my algorithm, my team, and a very clear understanding of who not to trust in the future. The first thing I did was send a message to every client Insight Dynamics had ever worked with. Nothing dramatic, nothing vengeful, just a simple notification that I was resuming operations under the original company structure and would be happy to continue providing the analytics services they'd contracted for. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. It turned out that most of our clients had been increasingly frustrated with Veritas North's approach. The new Visionary Initiatives team had been pushing them toward flashier, less accurate analytics tools that looked better in presentations but performed worse in practice. When they heard that I was back, with the original team and the original technology, 60% of them asked to transfer their contracts immediately. The second thing I did was leak the story to a technology reporter at the Pittsburgh Business Times. Not the whole story, just the basic facts. Local tech founder repurchases her company for $1 after being fired by corporate acquirer. It was too good a narrative for the media to ignore. Within a week, the story had been picked up by TechCrunch, Forbes, and the Wall Street Journal. The headline that hurt Veritas North the most was from Inc. magazine, How Corporate Greed Handed a Brilliant Entrepreneur the Deal of the Century. Lena tried to control the narrative with a LinkedIn post that will live forever in the annals of corporate communications disasters. It featured a photo of her standing in front of a motivational poster showing an eagle in flight, accompanied by 3 paragraphs of inspirational word salad about embracing change as a catalyst for authentic growth. The post was flooded with comments mocking everything from her syntax to her understanding of business law. LinkedIn actually had to disable comments after 2 hours. Gavin made one public statement, a carefully worded press release that described my departure as a mutual decision to pursue divergent strategic visions. The press release was immediately fact-checked by several business journalists who had obtained copies of my termination letter. It did not go well for Gavin, but the real damage was happening behind the scenes, where it counted most. I still had the contact information for every investor who had shown interest in Insight Dynamics during our growth phase. These were people who had specifically wanted to invest in my technology and my approach. When they heard that I was operating independently again, while Veritas North was struggling with client defections and negative publicity, the choice was obvious. Investment interest in Veritas North's upcoming IPO evaporated. 2 weeks after I reclaimed my company, they announced that the public offering was being postponed to optimize market conditions. 2 weeks after that, Gavin announced his resignation to pursue other opportunities. Lena lasted another month before being transitioned to advisory role, which is corporate speak for fired but allowed to pretend otherwise. Meanwhile, I was setting up operations in a new office space exactly 2 buildings away from Veritas North's gleaming tower. It was smaller but more functional, with better coffee and faster internet. We didn't have any motivational posters, but we did frame a copy of Section 14C of the acquisition agreement along with the original $1 check. It hangs in the conference room as a reminder about the importance of reading contracts carefully. The team came back gradually. Asha was first. Obviously, she'd been miserable under the new management structure and jumped at the chance to return to actual engineering work. Julian followed, bringing with him horror stories about being asked to make glowy more relatable to millennials. Beth took longer to decide, but eventually couldn't resist the opportunity to build something real instead of managing someone else's pivot strategy. We also attracted new talent. Word had gotten around the local tech community about what had happened, and we started getting resumes from engineers and analysts who were specifically interested in working for a company that valued technical excellence over marketing buzzwords. Our biggest challenge became managing growth responsibly instead of managing decline gracefully. 6 months after buying back my company, we were doing better than we ever had under Veritas North. Our client base had grown by 40%. Our revenue had doubled, and our algorithm accuracy had improved to 98%. We'd developed new products, opened 2 satellite offices, and had a waiting list of companies that wanted to work with us. But the best moment came 8 months later. At the Pittsburgh Technology Conference, I was scheduled to give a keynote presentation about predictive analytics and consumer behavior. The auditorium was packed, apparently. People were curious to hear from the woman who'd bought back her own company for $1. I'd prepared a technical talk about our latest algorithmic improvements and some case studies from recent client work. But when I walked onto that stage and saw the audience, I decided to tell a different story. 3 years ago, I began. I was living in a studio apartment and building algorithms between bowls of instant ramen. Today, I'm running a company that predicts human behavior with 98% accuracy. But the most important prediction I ever made wasn't about consumer purchasing patterns. It was about what would happen if I trusted the wrong people with my life's work. I told them everything, not the angry version, not the vindictive version, but the honest version. I talked about the excitement of building something meaningful, the devastation of watching it get corrupted, and the satisfaction of taking it back. I explained how a single contract clause had protected everything I'd worked for, and how attention to legal details had mattered more than any algorithm I'd ever written. When I finished, I pulled out a prop I'd brought specifically for the occasion, a blown-up copy of that original $1 check, mounted in a frame. This check bought me back my company, my team, my technology, and my future. But more than that, it bought me a lesson that I want to share with every entrepreneur in this room: never, ever sign a contract that you haven't read completely, and never trust anyone who tells you not to worry about the fine print. The audience stood up and applauded for 3 solid minutes. During the question and answer session, someone asked if I had any advice for other founders who might face similar situations. Read your contracts, I said. Trust your instincts. And if someone starts talking about thought leadership and brand transformation, start looking for the exit. As I was leaving the stage, my phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. Board of Directors at Veritas North just voted to dissolve the company. You outlasted them all. I walked back to the microphone. I just received word that Veritas North has officially ceased operations. So I guess the moral of the story is this: never underestimate a woman who writes her own contract terms. I held up the framed check one more time. And never, ever fire the person who built the thing you're trying to sell. The applause was even louder this time. Later that evening, at the conference after party, I found myself surrounded by entrepreneurs, investors, and executives who wanted to hear more details about the whole saga. But the conversation that mattered most was with a young woman named Sarah, who reminded me of myself 3 years earlier: brilliant, ambitious, and about to sign her first significant business contract. What's the most important thing to remember? she asked. I thought about it for a moment, then gave her the only advice that really mattered. Remember that every contract tells a story about trust. Make sure you're comfortable with both the story and the people who are writing it with you. Sarah nodded seriously, then asked, "And if you're not comfortable?" I smiled and pointed to the framed check hanging on the wall behind the bar, which I'd convinced the venue to display for the evening. Then you make sure you have a backup plan that costs exactly $1.